What's up friends, this is Shekhar Ghosh from Chitragya, the photography expert. Today we are going to discuss about one of the most important topics in photography, that is depth of field. Mastering depth of field can change your photography from amateur level to a pro level. The definition of depth of field is the distance between the closest and the farthest object in a photo that appears acceptably sharp or in focus. First of all, let us understand shallow and large depth of field with an illustration. When the depth of field is narrow or shallow, smaller area or rather field will be in focus. You can see a smaller area is in focus. When the depth of field is large, a larger area will be in focus. If you visualize this phenomenon in 3D, you will get a better understanding of this. Suppose this is an object and I have placed a camera in front of it. We have focused on this object and the area between the camera and the object appears blurry, okay, and the area beyond this object also appears blurry. That means the depth of field is very shallow and it is very limited. Now when the depth of field is large, when the object is in focus, the area in front of the object, that is in between the camera and object, will also be sharp, and the area beyond this object will also be sharp. You will notice that the distance between the closest thing that is in focus and the farthest thing that is in focus will be very large. We will not discuss the physics of how it happens, but we will certainly discuss about how DOF can be controlled. I am sure there are a lot of photographers who know that adjusting the aperture controls the depth of field. But do you know there are several other factors that affect it? The various factors that affect depth of field are aperture, camera and subject distance, focal length of the lens, sensor size. We'll discuss the factors one by one. Let's start with aperture. DSLRs are popular with photographers because of its ability to control the amount of light getting into the camera. There are various parameters that affects the amount of light entering into the camera. And aperture is one such parameter. Let's discuss about it. Aperture is the opening in the lens through which the light enters the camera and falls on the sensor. I'll show pictures of the same object taken at the same place at different aperture settings. You'll get the idea how aperture controls the depth of field. Do notice how the sharpness in the image changes as the f number increases. Increase in the f number means decrease in the aperture size. I'll keep the pictures side by side so that you can make a judgment by yourself. Shallow depth of field results in smooth blurry backgrounds, isolating the point of interest from the messy backgrounds. I mostly use shallow DOF in outdoor portraits, weddings and wildlife. On the other hand, larger depth of field is useful when you want to capture foreground and background equally sharp. I mostly use large DOF in landscapes, architectural and product photography. Moving ahead, let's discuss about the second factor that affects DOF, camera and subject distance. Simply put, the more the distance between camera and focus point, the larger the DOF will be. Let us understand this with two setups. In the first setup, I have kept my camera settings constant and only changed the distance between my camera and subject. In the first photo, notice only the tip of the cube is in focus. The foreground is blurry and gradually gets sharpened at the tip of cube and similarly gets blurry as the image moves to the background. Even the farthest edges of the cube are blurry. In the second image, the cube is sharp from start to end and only the edges of the cushion are blurry. In the third picture, edges of the cushion also starts appearing sharp. You will start noticing the patterns in the background, although it is still blurry. In the fourth picture, the patterns in the background gets clearly visible. For a better understanding, I have cropped all the images in such a way that the cube appears to be of similar size. Notice how the depth of field changes from shallow to large in each of them. In the second set of images, I have taken two series of pictures. In the first series, I kept the focusing distance constant at 2.5 feet and changed the aperture from f2.8 to f16. In the series 2, I kept the focusing distance constant at 4 feet and changed the aperture from f2.8 to f16. Now notice, when the focusing distance is 2.5 feet, the DOF is shallower than the DOF when the focusing distance is 4 feet. Please go through the series of pictures and study how the DOF changes according to the focusing distance and the aperture size. Now let's discuss about the third factor that affects the DOF, that is focal length of the lens. The greater the focal length of the lens, the smaller the depth of field will be, if the aperture and the focus distance is kept constant. To help you understand this factor, I have used 3 prime lenses of focal length 20 mm, 50 mm and 85 mm. I have fixed the camera and subject distance as 2.5 feet and the aperture at f/4. I have then switched the lenses one by one and came up with this result. The 20 mm lens falls in the wide angle category and captures more area than a standard or telephoto lens. A 50 mm lens is considered a standard lens because our eyes have a focal length of approximately 50 mm. An 85 mm lens is mid-range telephoto lens. The image created by it is larger than what our eyes can view. As the focal length increases, the image appears zoomed in. Also notice how the DOF decreases as we increase the focal length at a given aperture. Most of the cell phone cameras have a wide angle lens, hence the image created by it has a large DOF. Now the fourth factor, camera sensor size. The sensor size varies for different cameras. Most of the DSLRs are either cropped sensor or full frame sensor. Most of the mobile cameras and smaller digital cameras use micro four thirds sensors. The size of the sensor that a camera has ultimately determines how much light it uses to create an image. Image sensors are digital equivalent of films in the old cameras. As the sensor size increases, the DOF will decrease for a given aperture when filling the frame with a subject of the same size and distance. This is because the larger sensors require one to get closer to their subject or to use a larger focal length in order to fill the frame with that subject. In our example, we will be using APS-C sensors and full frame sensors to explain the effect of sensor size on DOF. Let us say that this is a full frame sensor. The dimensions of full frame sensors are 35 mm by 24 mm. Now the APS-C cameras have a crop factor of 1.5 and let us say this is the cropped sensor. The dimensions of cropped sensors are 30 mm by 20 mm. An FX sensor captures more light and produces an image with wider area than that of a DX sensor. If we shoot with the DX body, the image will look cropped and hence zoomed in. And to capture the similar view, we'll either move the camera closer to the subject or use a longer focal length lens. And you already know, when the focus distance is less, the DOF is shallower. Also, when the focal length is more, the DOF is shallower. That is why an FX body would produce a shallower DOF as compared to a DX body when it fills the frame with the subject of the same size. Since you stayed this long, I would like to give you a bonus tip. When shooting portraits, try to move your subject as far from the background. This will yield a blurrier background when using a shallow depth of field. Hope you enjoyed the video and had a great time learning about photography. This is Shekhar Ghosh signing off. Till then, see you. Goodbye.